A stormy sea was once the visible rage of a god. For our ancestors, every mountain, forest, and river was alive with meaning, a character in a story that explained the world. Ancient mythic realms were not fantasy. They were humanity's first and most profound science, a way to translate the chaos of nature into a cosmos we could understand. By the end of this exploration, you will see the natural world through an entirely different lens, discovering the hidden logic within stories of dragons, underworlds, and world trees. We will uncover why volcanoes were seen as divine forges and how the despair of winter was transformed into a tale of guaranteed return. What forgotten truth about our place in the world is still buried within these ancient stories? Above that stormy sea, the night sky offered a profound and calming contrast. It was a realm of perfect, predictable motion, a celestial clockwork that governed everything below. Long before telescopes or written language, our ancestors looked up and saw not random points of light, but a grand, mythic blueprint. The first and most universal realm they mapped was the heavens, a domain interpreted as divine order incarnate. This was humanity's original observatory, and every culture became an astronomer, weaving stories from the constellations to explain the rhythms of their world. The sun was not merely a star, it was a deity on a daily journey. The Egyptians envisioned Ra, the sun god, piloting a magnificent bark or solar boat across the dome of the sky by day. Of divine logic, the ground was a door to the unknown. This second great realm was the Underworld, a subterranean domain that every culture envisioned in its own shadowed image. From the Greek Hades to the Mesopotamian Ker, these were not just places of final rest, they were active, necessary landscapes that explained the most fundamental cycles of the natural world. What our ancestors saw when they looked into a deep cave or a freshly dug grave was a process both terrifying and essential, decay and rebirth intertwined. A crack in the earth, a dark well where water mysteriously pooled. These were not geological features, they were portals. They were thresholds where one could vanish, where offerings to Chthonic or Earth, deities were made, and where life-giving springs inexplicably emerged from the darkness. This duality was key. The same soil that received the seed and the body also provided the water for new growth. The underworld, therefore, was not merely an end, it was a transformative chamber. Consider the journey of a single seed. It falls into the dark, buried and seemingly lost. It breaks down, its old form dissolving in the moist, hidden earth. Then, from that very dissolution, a green shoot pushes upward toward the light. Ancient minds saw this not as botany, but as mythic drama. The Sumerian tale of the goddess Inanna descending into the underworld, stripped of her powers and symbols, only to be rescued and restored, mirrors this exact cycle. Her return brings life back to the withered world. Similarly, the Greek story of Persephone, who must spend part of each year in the realm of Hades, directly explains the seasonal death and rebirth of vegetation. Her time below brings autumn and winter, her return heralds spring. These stories performed a profound psychological and cultural function. They took the universal human fear of the buried, the unseen, and the process of ending, and they reframed it. They crafted a narrative where decay was not a final corruption, but a necessary phase in a regenerative loop. The darkness under the ground was not a void, it was a womb. By giving this fearful process a geography, rulers, and a story, our ancestors transformed a source of dread into a source of understanding. They saw the underworld as the earth's hidden engine, where what was lost was processed and returned in a new form, ensuring the continuity of life above. It was the mythic answer to a question written in every fallen leaf and every sprouting stalk, a story that found purpose in the dark. but between the stable heavens above and the transformative earth below lay a third realm of pure, untamed power. For ancient coastal and island societies, the vast ocean was not a resource. It was a living, breathing entity of immense and terrifying mystery. This was the Oceanic abyss, the mythic waters that represented chaos itself, the primordial soup from which all order was believed to have been born. Where the sky offered predictable cycles, the sea offered only unpredictable fury. Its storms were not weather events. They were the visible rage of temperamental deities. The Greek god Poseidon did not cause earthquakes and tempests. He was those forces given a face and a trident. The Norse sea god Njörður commanded the winds and the waves, his favor meaning safe passage, his displeasure a death sentence. This personification was a critical survival tool. By framing the ocean's immense power as the mood of a conscious being, sailors and fishermen could engage with it. They developed rituals, made offerings before voyages, and observed strict taboos, all to appease a volatile divinity. This transformed sheer, paralyzing terror into a relationship, however precarious. The sea's monsters were born from this same need to explain the unexplainable. The biblical Leviathan and the Norse Kraken were not mere fantasy. They were mythic explanations for very real and deadly phenomena. A sudden, crushing whirlpool that could drag a ship under became the coils of a massive sea serpent. A rogue wave, appearing from nowhere to smash a vessel, was the slap of a titanic tentacle. The shadowy, unknown creatures glimpsed in the deep were given form as dragons or immense fish. These stories served as early maritime warnings, embedding vital survival knowledge within a memorable narrative. Do not sail here, for this is the Leviathan's domain. Be silent during this ritual, lest you attract the Kraken's attention. Most profoundly, the ocean itself was often envisioned as the original state of the universe. In Babylonian myth, the world was created from the body of the saltwater goddess Tiamat, who embodied the chaotic, primeval sea. The Greek titan Oceanus was a great river encircling the world, the source of all fresh water. In these cosmologies, the ordered earth and stable sky emerged from this watery chaos, meaning the sea retained its primal, raw power. It was a reminder that the comfortable world of fields and cities was just an island, a temporary order carved from an eternal, churning disorder. This interpretation gave meaning to the sailor's hardship. A successful voyage was not just luck, it was a temporary truce negotiated with the fundamental chaos of existence. The ocean, in all its terrifying beauty, was the ancient world's most potent symbol of nature's untamable heart, a realm where human control vanished and the oldest stories of creation and destruction played out with every tide. From that churning, primal sea, the human gaze would always return to the most stable landmark on the horizon. The mountain stood immovable, a defiant challenge to the chaos of water and sky. This was the fourth great realm, the sacred peak, and it served as the ultimate anchor for the ancient imagination. Across every continent, cultures looked to their highest local summit and saw not just rock and ice, but the axis of the entire world. It was the central pillar connecting all the layers of existence, a place where heaven, earth, and the underworld met. The Greeks envisioned Mount Olympus as a magnificent, cloud-veiled palace where the gods held court, physically removed from the mortal world yet overseeing it. In Hindu, Jain, and Buddhist cosmology, the colossal Mount Meru rose at the very center of the universe, with the sun, moon, and stars revolving around its glittering peaks. Even in the flat river plains of Mesopotamia, where no natural mountains existed, people built them. The great ziggurats, those stepped temple towers, were artificial sacred mountains. Their very architecture was a prayer in brick, a human-made ladder intended to bridge the gap between the community and the divine. The logic was profoundly physical. A mountain's peak, often shrouded in mist and capped with eternal snow, seemed to literally hold up the dome of the sky. It was the world's pillar, and the clouds that gathered around its summit were the visible breath of the gods, a permanent barrier separating the sacred from the profane. But some mountains held a more volatile power. A volcano was not merely a geological feature, it was a direct conduit to the underworld's furious energy. Mount Etna in Sicily was seen as the forge of the Greek god Hephaestus, where the clang of his hammer caused the earth to tremble and eruptions spewed his divine fire. For the Aztecs, Popocatépetl was not a dormant giant, but a warrior transformed, his fiery breath and smoky sighs a permanent reminder of celestial passion and wrath. These interpretations transformed terrifying, destructive events into comprehensible narratives. An eruption was not random geologic violence, it was the activity of a deity, a sign that could be interpreted, perhaps even appeased through ritual. This vertical organization of the cosmos provided something the other realms could not, a fixed center. The ocean was boundless chaos, the underworld was hidden depth, and the heavens were a rotating dome. The mountain, however, was a constant. It gave the landscape a heart, a central reference point from which all directions could be measured and all stories could be oriented. It organized space itself. To live in the shadow of a sacred mountain was to live in a known universe, with a divine anchor point ensuring cosmic stability. It meant the gods had a fixed address, and that the boundary between their world and ours had a tangible, watchable location. The mountain realm answered a deep human need for a center, for a place that literally and symbolically held the world together. The mountain's solid peak offered a comforting center, but just beyond the village boundary, an entirely different world began. Here, the ordered realm of human cultivation gave way to the whispering, shadowed chaos of the fifth great mythic domain, the enchanted forest. For early agricultural societies, the deep woods were not a scenic backdrop. They were a living, breathing entity, a conscious wilderness teeming with unseen forces. This was the untamed and animate wild, a place where every rustling leaf and snapping twig could signal the presence of a spirit. In the vast Celtic forests like Broceliande, in the dense Germanic woods, and across the sprawling Slavic taiga, people did not see an empty landscape. They saw a populated one, ruled by capricious deities like Cernunnos, the horned god of the animals, or the Leshy, a forest spirit who could lead travelers astray with a single glance. This personification was a direct response to the forest's very real, dual nature. On one hand, it was the community's lifeline, providing the wood for shelter and fire, the game for sustenance, and the medicinal herbs for healing. On the other, it was a place of profound peril, home to physical predators, disorienting paths that could swallow a person forever, and unseen threats to health. By filling this ambiguous space with mythic beings, cultures crafted a sophisticated system of ecological management through story. These narratives established crucial rules for sustainable interaction. You made a small offering to the forest spirit before felling a great oak, acknowledging its life. There were strict taboos against hunting the white stag or cutting the elder tree, protecting certain species by declaring them sacred to a deity. The stories of fairies who would curse those who polluted a spring or reward those who left them gifts created an early form of environmental ethics. The forest was not a resource to be plundered, it was a neighbor with a temper, a conscious partner in a delicate relationship. This mythic framing transformed sheer, random danger into a negotiated exchange. Getting lost was not just bad luck, it was the Leshy's mischief, a consequence for disrespect. A successful hunt was not merely skill, it was the favor of Cernunnos. The enchanted forest, in all its dark beauty, served as the ancient mind's buffer zone between the human world of order and the raw, uncontrolled pulse of nature itself. It taught respect through narrative, enforcing conservation not with laws, but with legends that made the wilderness itself a character to be reckoned with. The forest's whispering shadows gave way to the clear, defining sound of moving water. This sixth and final realm was the river and the spring, the flowing arteries of the ancient world that were seen as far more than just geography. They were deified, worshipped as goddesses who did not merely provide life. They embodied its very essence and its most profound paradox, constant change within an eternal cycle. A river was not just water in motion, it was time itself made visible, carving the landscape and carrying everything forward in its current. This is why cultures around the world made their greatest rivers into divine beings. The Egyptians did not live beside the Nile, they lived by the grace of Hapi, the god of the annual inundation whose floods deposited the rich, black silt that made the desert bloom. His predictable, life-giving rise was the foundation of their entire calendar and civilization. In India, the Ganges descended from the heavens, a celestial goddess, Ganga, whose sacred waters were believed to purify not just the body, but the soul, carrying prayers and offerings into the divine realm. This sanctification of a water source was a brilliant act of cultural preservation. By declaring a river holy, a society protected its watershed, ensuring its cleanliness and sustainability through reverence rather than regulation. But if a great river represented the grand, public flow of life, the spring represented its hidden, intimate source. Secluded springs were seen as the dwelling places of nymphs, like the Greek naiads, spirits of freshwater whose favor meant a pure, reliable flow. The most famous was perhaps the Castalian spring at Delphi, where pilgrims would ritually wash before consulting the oracle. Here, water was directly linked to prophecy and hidden wisdom, the idea being that to drink from or be cleansed by such a source was to access deeper truths, to see the flow of fate as clearly as one saw the water bubbling from the rock. This connection between flowing water and memory or transition led to some of mythology's most poignant concepts. The Greeks envisioned multiple rivers in the underworld. There was the Styx, the river of hate, which formed the unbreakable oath and the final boundary between the worlds of the living and the departed. And there was the Lethe, the river of forgetfulness, whose waters would erase the memories of a soul before rebirth. This was a profound interpretation of the human experience. The river's one-way flow perfectly mirrored the irreversible journey of a lifetime, while its cyclical return to the sea through rain and springs mirrored the hope for renewal. A community that saw its local stream as a goddess or a spring as an oracle was doing something essential. They were encoding gratitude for their most vital resource into the heart of their belief system. They were observing that just as water shapes stone over eons, time shapes all living things, and that both forces demand respect. In the endless flow of a river, our ancestors saw the story of their own lives, a current moving from a hidden source toward a distant, unknown sea, with every bend holding the potential for new meaning. Yet beyond the life-giving flow of the river lay its absolute opposite, a landscape that refused to sustain. The desert and the barren wasteland became the seventh and perhaps most demanding mythic realm, a place of spiritual trial and radical purification. In stark contrast to the forest's abundance or the river's generosity, these empty expanses were not seen as voids, but as potent spaces for an encounter with the absolute. Stripped of all distraction and comfort, the desert became a monumental stage for the human spirit to face itself. For the ancient Egyptians, the fertile black land of the Nile Valley was the realm of order, but the surrounding red desert was the domain of Set, the god of chaos, storms, and the foreign. It was a place of danger and isolation, but also of necessary transformation. Similarly, in the vast Australian outback, the creation stories of the Dreamtime describe ancestral beings traversing these arid landscapes, singing the world into existence and leaving sacred sites in their wake. The land's apparent emptiness was, in truth, a densely inscribed spiritual text. This interpretation served a profound human need. When survival itself is precarious, when every step is a negotiation with heat, thirst, and exposure, the experience strips away the non-essential. Ancient cultures recognized this harshness as a kind of spiritual amplifier. They deliberately framed these landscapes as the ultimate testing grounds. The 40 days and nights of trial in the wilderness, a motif found across traditions, uses the desert's austerity to represent a period of intense focus, where external supports are removed so that internal strength can be forged. Ascetics and seekers would venture into these wastes for vision quests, believing that the very deprivation would clear the mind and open it to revelation. The physical hardship of the desert was reinterpreted as a necessary fire, burning away illusion and pride. In this crucible, facing what they called inner demons or spiritual adversaries was not a metaphor, it was a direct result of the environment's relentless pressure. By mythologizing the wasteland, our ancestors performed a remarkable act of meaning-making. They transformed a physically threatening and seemingly meaningless environment into a sacred geography of metamorphosis. The desert was not a place to avoid, but a place to approach with reverence when one sought a fundamental change. Its silence was not an absence, but a presence. Its emptiness was not a lack, but a space cleared for something new to enter. In finding profound purpose in austerity, these stories taught that sometimes, to find what is truly vital, you must first journey through a landscape that offers nothing at all. But the desert's profound silence is broken by a force of pure sound and fury. Before the science of meteorology, the sky was not a passive canvas. It was a living face expressing divine emotion. The eighth and most immediate mythic interpretation transformed every storm, every breeze, and every drought into a form of direct communication from the gods. A sudden clap of thunder was not atmospheric pressure. It was the mighty voice of Zeus echoing across the heavens, or the hammer of Thor striking his anvil in the clouds. A jagged bolt of lightning was not a static discharge. It was the fiery spear of the Hindu god Indra, hurled down to strike the unrighteous, or the flash of a divine weapon cleaving the sky. This personification served a vital psychological purpose. It made the utterly unpredictable and often terrifying forces of weather into something relatable, a dramatic dialogue between humanity and the powers above. The climate became a conversation, and every event was a sentence to be interpreted. A gentle, soaking rain might be seen as the benevolent gift of the Aztec storm god Tlaloc, who required the tears of children as offerings to coax the clouds to weep life upon the crops. In other traditions, a soft drizzle could be interpreted as the sorrow of a sky goddess, her tears watering the world below. This framework embedded acute environmental observation into the very heart of daily ritual and religious practice. Communities became expert readers of the sky's moods, not as meteorologists but as theologians. The timing of winds, the color of clouds at sunset, the behavior of animals before a storm, all these were signs in an ongoing celestial discourse. Rituals arose as humanity's attempt to speak back, to influence this dialogue. The rhythmic, communal rain dances of many indigenous cultures were not mere performances. They were powerful petitions, a concerted effort to align human energy with the needed energy of the heavens. Sacrifices, from the first fruits of a harvest to more solemn offerings, were attempts to appease a storm god's wrath or thank a rain bringer for their generosity. This practice did more than just try to control the uncontrollable. It managed the deep-seated anxiety of living under an unpredictable atmosphere. By framing a devastating drought as the displeasure of a specific deity, a community had a course of action, a ritual to perform, a reason to examine its own conduct. It transformed passive suffering into active engagement, however symbolic. A successful harvest after a rain dance was not coincidence, it was proof the dialogue had been heard. This interpretation wove the community's fate directly into the fabric of the cosmos, making every breeze a whisper and every storm a shout in an ancient, ongoing story about the relationship between the human heart and the heart of the world. The roaring sky and the silent desert both spoke a language of raw power, but another form of communication was always closer at hand. In the eyes of the ancient observer, every creature was a walking lesson. The ninth profound interpretation saw the animal kingdom not just as a resource, but as a living library of natural principles, with hybrid beasts and sacred totems acting as the ultimate symbols. These were not random monsters from a dream. They were careful, distilled observations of ecology and behavior, abstracted into mythic form to explain humanity's own place in the web of life. Consider the majestic and imposing Sphinx of Egypt with the powerful body of a lion and the knowing face of a human ruler. This was not merely a statue, it was a philosophical statement carved in stone. It guarded the approaches to temples and tombs because it represented the ideal fusion of raw, natural strength with conscious, human intellect and authority. To pass the Sphinx was to acknowledge that true power and sacred knowledge required both qualities, that civilization itself was a partnership between human reason and the formidable forces of the wild. This concept of hybrid beings extended far beyond guardianship. Across Eurasia, the dragon emerged again and again, not as a simple villain, but as a profound embodiment of dualistic natural forces. In many Asian traditions, dragons were intimately tied to water. They lived in deep pools, commanded the rains, and their ascent into the heavens brought the life-giving monsoon. Here, the dragon symbolized the river itself, its long, serpentine body mirroring the water's winding path, its capacity for flooding reflecting nature's terrifying yet fertile power. A storm that destroyed a village but watered the fields was the dragon's breath, a single force containing both creative and destructive potential. This interpretation transformed a terrifying weather event into a narrative about balance and necessary chaos. On a more intimate scale, countless cultures practiced totemism, where a clan or family identified with a specific animal like the bear, the eagle, or the wolf. This was not mere mascotry, it was a deep statement of kinship and emulation. A clan that took the bear as its totem saw in the animal's strength, its hibernation cycle of death and rebirth, and its protective nature, a set of virtues to aspire to. They believed they shared a literal or spiritual ancestry with the creature, tying their human community's identity directly to an observable truth of the natural world. The eagle's incredible vision and dominion of the skies made it a symbol of divine perspective and authority for everyone from the Romans to many indigenous nations of North America. These animal forms served as the ancient world's most efficient data compression. The complex behavior of an entire species, its role in the ecosystem, and the human qualities it inspired could all be contained in a single, powerful image. A story about trickster coyote or raven taught lessons about cleverness and consequence. The lion represented undisputed sovereignty. The owl, with its silent flight and night vision, became synonymous with hidden wisdom. By weaving these symbols into their myths and adorning their artifacts with these forms, our ancestors were creating a field guide to the universe, one where every creature was a character representing a fundamental force or moral truth. They were recognizing that to understand the wolf, the river, or the storm was to understand a part of themselves, and that the boundary between the human realm and the natural world was not a wall, but a tapestry of shared meaning. The profound wisdom of the animal world was always framed by a grander, celestial rhythm. Across the turning year, the most powerful story our ancestors ever told was written not in stone, but in the very soil and sky. This 10th and final interpretation saw the entire cycle of seasons as an epic, divine drama, a cosmic play performed by gods and goddesses to explain the most fundamental pulse of life itself. The annual death and rebirth of vegetation provided the ultimate narrative template, a story so vital it was etched into the heart of countless cultures. This was not mere entertainment, it was humanity's first attempt to give a face, a name, and a reason to the relentless turning of time. In ancient Greece, the deep chill of winter and the jubilant bloom of spring were not weather patterns, they were emotional states. They were the direct result of the goddess Demeter's grief and her subsequent joy. When her daughter Persephone was taken to the underworld, Demeter's sorrow made the world barren. Persephone's partial return each spring brought her mother's relief, and with it the return of life to the fields. This elegant myth did more than explain seasons, it gave emotional logic to hardship. The anxiety of potential famine was transformed into a temporary, understood phase in a mother's story, a period of mourning that would assuredly end. Similarly, in the Celtic world, the harshness of winter and the warmth of summer were envisioned as a titanic, eternal struggle between two powerful divine figures. The Cailleach, the veiled crone of winter, wielded the frost and commanded the storms. Her rival, often the Morrigan in her life-giving aspect, or the goddess Brigid, represented the fertile, creative force of summer. Their mythic battle across the landscape explained why some years the winter lingered with fierce grip, and other years the summer arrived with gentle abundance. It framed the climate's variability as a dynamic, conscious conflict, making the unpredictability of harvests part of a larger, comprehensible narrative. In Egypt, the cycle was even more precise, tied to the sun's unwavering journey. The god Amun-Ra did not simply set at night. He embarked on a perilous voyage through the 12 hours of the underworld, facing adversaries and being regenerated in the sacred waters of none to be reborn at dawn. This daily drama mirrored the annual one, where the sun's strength waned in winter and was reborn at the solstice. These stories served as the world's first cosmological models, giving rhythmic, predictable structure to the very flow of time. They answered a deep human need for assurance in a precarious existence. By embedding the raw facts of agricultural reality, the necessity of decay for renewal, the fallow period for future fertility, into a sacred drama, our ancestors performed a masterful act of psychological alchemy. The despair of a barren field in late autumn was no longer a silent threat. It was Act 3 in a play where Act 4 was already written, guaranteeing the return of the hero, the goddess, or the sun. This narrative transformed passive endurance into participatory faith. Rituals and festivals were not just celebrations, they were crucial performances meant to uphold the story, to ensure the divine actors played their parts correctly so the cycle would continue. The planting of a seed became a sacred act of hope, a tiny echo of a goddess's return from the underworld. The harvest was not an end, but a triumphant climax before the necessary rest. In seeing the seasons as an epic, our ancestors found the ultimate comfort, that even in the deepest silence of winter, the story was still turning, and the next chapter was always one of return. That epic seasonal drama depended on a single, foundational belief. The entire world was alive. This is the 11th and perhaps most fundamental cultural lens, animism, the conviction that spirit resides in all things. For countless early cultures, this was not a poetic metaphor, it was the bedrock of reality. Every mountain, every ancient tree, every river bend and unusual stone was not an object, but a subject, a conscious being with its own presence and story. This belief wove humanity into the fabric of the world not as its master, but as one member of a vast, sentient community. In the Shinto tradition of Japan, this spirit is called kami. A kami could be the powerful essence of a great mountain like Mount Fuji, or the gentle, playful presence in a small garden stream. It could inhabit a strikingly shaped rock or an exceptionally old cedar tree. The key was not to worship from a distance, but to engage with respect, to acknowledge that one was in the presence of a neighbor with its own dignity and power. Similarly, for many Native American and other indigenous traditions, a distinctive stone found on a trail might not be a mere mineral. It could be a stone person, a being with its own journey and lessons to share. To take it without acknowledgement or purpose would be a kind of theft from a community member. This world, you created a profound and automatic ecological ethic. If the forest is the hair of a mountain spirit, you do not clear-cut it. If the river is the blood of a water goddess, you do not poison it. Harming a natural feature was not an economic or environmental misstep. It was a social and spiritual offense, an act of violence against a conscious neighbor. This embedded principles of sustainability and conservation directly into the spiritual narrative of daily life. Offerings were made before hunting a deer, acknowledging the spirit of the animal and its gift of sustenance. A prayer might be said before felling a tree, asking permission from the spirit of the forest and explaining the need for shelter. This practice of reciprocity, of giving back as much as one took, was the practical outcome of seeing the world as a web of relationships rather than a collection of resources. Animism answered the loneliness of existence by populating the universe with companions. The wind was not an empty force, it was the breath of a sky being. The echo in a canyon was not a physical rebound, it was the voice of the rock itself. This interpretation fostered a deep, intuitive mindfulness, a constant awareness that one was never truly alone, but always in the company of other lives, each with its own right to exist. It was a philosophy that taught humility not through doctrine, but through the simple, daily recognition that the world is full of persons, only some of whom are human. This deep sense of a living world demanded an origin story. The 12th and perhaps most ambitious cultural lens was the creation myth, a narrative that did far more than recount a beginning. It was humanity's first attempt to write a user manual for the entire cosmos, explaining how raw, chaotic nature became the ordered, familiar world. Every culture's origin story is, at its heart, a tale of natural order emerging from primal disorder. These were not whimsical fables, but serious cosmological models that answered the most fundamental questions. Why is the sky above us and the earth below? Why does the sea have a boundary? The answers were found in epic drama. In the Babylonian Enuma Elish, the world begins not with light, but with a roiling, saltwater chaos embodied by the goddess Tiamat. From this turbulent, primordial ocean, the younger gods arise, and eventually the storm god Marduk confronts Tiamat. He defeats her, and from her massive body crafts the universe itself. He splits her carcass like a clam shell, raising one half to form the dome of the heavens and fixing the other as the foundation of the earth. Her weeping eyes become the sources of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. This is a profound act of mythic cartography. It takes the observable geography of Mesopotamia, a flat land defined by two great rivers under a vast sky, and gives it a divine, purposeful origin. The chaotic sea is literally transformed into structured land, explaining why the world feels solid and separate from the waters above and below. On another continent, the Aboriginal concept of the Dreamtime describes a similar process of world shaping, but through journey and song. In the beginning, the ancestral beings emerged from a featureless land and a blank sky. As they traveled, their actions and the songs they sang literally called the landscape into being. A digging stick dragged along the ground became a river valley. A body resting on the earth formed a mountain range. A fight between ancestors left a scattering of boulders. Here, creation is an ongoing, participatory act, with the land itself being a living record of sacred events. The world's structure is not imposed from above, but sung into existence from within, making every hill and waterhole a chapter in an eternal story. Meanwhile, in the cold north, the Norse myth of Ginnungagap described a different kind of raw material. In the beginning, there was only a vast, yawning void. To the north of this gap lay a realm of ice and frost, Niflheim. To the south, a realm of fire, Muspelheim, where the heat and the cold met in the great emptiness, the dripping ice thawed, and from those melting drops, the first being, the giant Ymir, was formed. This narrative brilliantly translates the harsh Scandinavian environment into cosmic terms. The world is born from the dynamic, creative tension between opposing elemental forces, fire and ice, a story that makes sense of a landscape carved by glaciers and volcanic heat. These myths served a critical purpose beyond explanation. They provided a foundational reason for why things are the way they are, embedding moral and social order into the very blueprint of nature. By describing how a god established the heavens or an ancestor named the animals, these stories justified human laws, social hierarchies, and rituals as extensions of the cosmic design. They turned the raw, often frightening, observations of geography, astronomy, and weather into a purposeful and often moral architecture. The chaos was not meaningless. It was the necessary raw material from which a habitable, knowable world was forged. In listening to a creation myth, an ancient person was not just hearing a story about the past. They were receiving a map of meaning for the present, understanding their place within a universe that began with a deliberate and often sacred act of organization. That profound sense of a living, organized world found perhaps its most complete expression in the frozen north. The Norse vision of the cosmos was not a simple hierarchy of gods above and mortals below, but an immense, breathing ecosystem of staggering complexity and fragile balance. At its very center stood Yggdrasil, the world ash tree, a living axis so vast its branches held the heavens and its three great roots drank from wells of fate, memory, and primal mist. This was not just a symbol, it was a cosmic diagram, a breathtakingly intricate model that mapped every natural force and environmental extreme known to the Norse people onto a single, interconnected system. Its highest bough, shimmering with dew that became the morning mist, cradled Asgard, the realm of the Aesir gods. Its trunk passed through Midgard, our own human world, encircled by the great serpent Jörmungandr. And its roots delved deep into three separate foundational springs. One root reached the well of Erd, where the Norns, the Fates, carved destiny into the tree's bark. Another sank into Mimir's well, a source of such profound wisdom that the god Odin sacrificed an eye to drink from it. The third stretched into the freezing mists of Niflheim, to the spring Virgilmere, the bubbling cauldron from which all rivers flowed. In this single image, the Norse mind connected the moisture of the air, the flow of waterways, the hidden knowledge of the earth, and the inescapable pull of time itself, all fed by the same singular source. This was an ancient vision of ecological interdependence, a recognition that the sky, the water, the land, and destiny were not separate domains, but parts of a single, living organism. Yet this system was under constant threat, a reality mirrored in the creatures that inhabited the tree. An eagle perched in the highest branches, while a dragon named Nidhogg ceaselessly gnawed at the deepest roots. Between them, the squirrel Ratatoska ran up and down the trunk, carrying insults and sowing discord. This was not a picture of peaceful harmony, but of dynamic, cyclical conflict. Nidhogg's gnawing represented the inevitable forces of decay and erosion, the natural processes that break down all structures over time. The squirrel's mischief embodied the small, daily tensions and misunderstandings that can escalate. The eagle and the dragon, locked in a silent struggle across the vast height of the tree, represented the eternal tension between lofty order and chaotic dissolution. The Norse saw their universe not as a static monument, but as a living thing under siege by the very processes that sustained it, a profound acknowledgement that creation and destruction are two sides of the same leaf. This complexity extended to the 9 worlds held within the tree's embrace. They were not randomly placed, but arranged according to the environmental realities of the Norse world. At one extreme lay fiery Muspelheim, the realm of primordial heat and the home of the fire giants. At the other sat icy Niflheim, a land of frost, mist, and cold so profound it could freeze the soul. Between these elemental poles existed all the other realms, from the bright fields of Alfheim, home of the light elves, to the dark, intricate caverns of Svartalfheim, where the dwarves forged their wonders. This cosmology directly reflected the Scandinavian experience of existing between brutal, opposing forces: the blazing summer sun against the deep, endless winter night, the geothermal heat of a hot spring against the crushing cold of a glacier. The 9 worlds were a mythic temperature map, explaining the diversity of their harsh environment as different neighborhoods within the same cosmic tree. The ultimate lesson of Yggdrasil was its fragility. The tree, for all its majesty, was said to tremble. It suffered, its leaves yellowing, its bark scarred by the creatures that lived upon and within it. The Norse prophecies of Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods, described the tree shaking violently before the final battle. This was a staggering cultural insight. Long before modern systems theory, the Norse had crafted a mythology that understood the world as a profoundly interconnected and delicate web. They saw that the actions in one realm, whether the scheming of a god or the gnawing of a serpent at the root, could send tremors through the entire structure. Their universe was not a given, it was a precarious balance, a living system that required vigilance, sacrifice, and an acceptance of cyclical conflict to maintain. In the groaning of the world tree, they heard the sound of nature itself, a vast, ancient, and vulnerable being, of which they were only one small, conscious part. That delicate Norse world tree, trembling between fire and ice, finds a startling parallel in the sun-drenched landscapes of ancient Mesoamerica. For the Maya and the Aztecs, the cosmos was not a stable system, but a perilous achievement, a fragile era won from chaos and maintained only through relentless sacred effort. Their worldview was built on a foundation of cycles so profound they encompassed the birth and death of entire worlds. According to their creation myths, we do not live in the first world, but the 5th. 4 previous ages or suns had been created and then utterly destroyed by catastrophic forces. One world was devoured by jaguars, another ripped apart by hurricane winds, a third consumed by a rain of fire, and a 4th drowned in a great flood. These were not mere stories of disaster, they were cosmological records, explanations for the terrifying power of their environment. Each destruction was linked to a natural element they knew intimately: the predator in the jungle, the storm that could flatten a city, the volcano that could blacken the sky, the flood that could erase fields. The message was clear: the universe itself operated in vast, rhythmic convulsions of creation and annihilation. Our current time, the 5th sun, known as the sun of movement, was born from sacrifice. In the Aztec telling, the gods gathered at Teotihuacan and threw themselves into a divine fire to set this new sun in motion. But a sun in motion requires fuel. This established the core, chilling principle of their reality, that life could only be sustained by the energy of life itself. The sun was not a distant ball of gas, it was a divine being, Huitzilopochtli, engaged in a daily battle against the forces of darkness. To win this battle, to ensure the sun would rise tomorrow, he required strength, the vital life force found in the human heart and in the blood. This is where the concept of ritual sacrifice, a practice so often misunderstood, finds its mythic logic. From their perspective, this was not violence for its own sake, but the most solemn form of cosmic maintenance. It was a reciprocal exchange, a returning of sacred energy borrowed from the gods at the moment of creation. The most potent offering was the human heart, because it was seen as the seat of that precious life force, the very substance that could nourish the weary sun god and keep the cosmic machinery turning. This interpretation was a direct, mythic reflection of the volatile and demanding world they inhabited. Mesoamerica was a land of breathtaking beauty and sudden, overwhelming force, prone to hurricanes from the coasts, devastating droughts that could wither maize crops for years, and the ever-present threat of earthquakes and volcanic eruptions from the fiery mountains that ringed their valleys. In such an environment, catastrophe was not a random accident. It was a recurring character in the story of survival. Their mythology framed these terrifying events not as meaningless suffering, but as part of the sacred, if precarious, cycle. A drought might mean the offerings had been insufficient, the cosmic balance tipping. A volcanic eruption was not geology. It was the fiery breath of a mountain god, perhaps a sign of divine displeasure or a necessary purge before renewal. This belief system transformed passive fear into active, though solemn, participation. Every ritual, every calendar cycle meticulously tracked by Maya astronomers, every ceremony conducted by Aztec priests was an act of profound responsibility. They were not merely inhabitants of the world, they were its co-sustainers, tasked with feeding the very gods who held back the perpetual threat of a fifth and final destruction. The pressure of existence was immense, but it was given meaning, woven into a narrative where human action, however severe, was essential to the continuation of time itself. In their view, the sunrise each morning was not a guarantee. It was a victory they helped to win, a daily renewal purchased through the most sacred currency they knew, the unwavering cycle of energy that flowed between the human realm and the heart of the cosmos. The pressure to sustain a cosmic sun was immense, yet across the world's largest ocean, an entire civilization thrived by listening to a different kind of story. For the Polynesian voyagers, the mythic realm was not a distant spiritual concept. It was the very map they sailed by. Their legendary exploration of the Pacific, reaching the most remote islands on Earth, was not achieved by chance or simple bravery. It was guided by a profound and practical wisdom where every story was a chart, every star a named guide, and the ocean itself was a familiar road written in song. They saw the sea not as a terrifying abyss of chaos, but as a great interconnected highway, its pathways laid down by their ancestors. The demigod Moi did not just tell a story, he explained geography. In their traditions, Moi used his magical fish hook to pull the very islands up from the ocean depths. This was a brilliant narrative device, transforming the random, awe-inspiring discovery of a new land into a purposeful, divine act. It created a sense of kinship with the land itself, a feeling that every island they found was a gift intended for them, pulled from the sea by a beloved cultural hero. This mythic framing gave them the confidence to venture into the unknown, believing they were not lost but following in the wake of their forebears. But mythology alone could not guide a canoe. The true genius of Polynesian wayfinding lay in its fusion of story with meticulous, multi-generational observation. Their master navigators or wayfinders committed entire mental libraries to memory, libraries that had no written form. The night sky was their primary text. They did not see our constellations as static pictures of animals or gods. They saw them as kavaenga, star paths, moving houses in the heavens that rose and set over specific islands. When the constellation known as Manaiakalani, our Scorpius, was directly overhead, it pointed the way to Tahiti. The Pleiades, or Matariki, marked the season for planting and the direction for voyages to the north. Each star was a lighthouse, and its position was a coordinate in a vast, celestial map memorized from childhood. This celestial knowledge was woven into chants and stories, making the complex data unforgettable. A single chant could encode the succession of stars that would appear on a voyage from one island to another, turning a dangerous journey into a rhythmic, predictable sequence. Yet the stars were only one layer of their navigational system. They read the ocean itself as a living, speaking entity. They learned to interpret the subtle patterns of swells, how they refracted around islands hundreds of miles away, creating a telltale pattern in the waves that could be felt by a trained navigator lying in the canoe. They watched the flight paths of specific seabirds, knowing that certain species would fly out to sea to fish at dawn and return to land at dusk, revealing the direction of an unseen island. They observed the color and temperature of the water, the types of driftwood and marine life, all of which were clues woven into their oral tradition. A story about a particular god associated with a current was also a remembered fact about that current's speed and direction. A legend about a spirit inhabiting a certain cloud formation was a meteorological note about approaching weather. In this system, there was no separation between the mythic realm and the physical one. The story of an ancestral pathway was the actual ocean current. The song of a star was the precise bearing for a voyage. Myth became the ultimate data storage technology, compressing centuries of accumulated environmental science into a form that was both beautiful and practically unlosable, passed down through generations without a single written word. It was a cosmology of profound intimacy, where to know a story was to know the way home, and to understand the legends was to possess the tools to settle a planet. The Polynesian star paths were a living science, but they were not science as we define it today. They represent something even more fundamental, a way of thinking where every story was a hypothesis, every character a variable in the grand equation of existence. Long before laboratories or peer-reviewed journals, myth served this exact purpose. It was humanity's first and most ambitious attempt at a unified theory of everything, a system we now call mythopoeic thought. This mindset did not see a divide between the subjective world of feeling and the objective world of fact. Instead, it wove them together into a single, coherent tapestry where meaning and mechanism were inseparable. A lightning strike was not just an electrical discharge, it was the visible anger of a sky god, a complete package of physical event and emotional cause. This fusion created powerful, explanatory models for phenomena that were otherwise terrifying and random. The Greek myth of Phaethon provides a perfect example. Phaethon, the son of the sun god Helios, begged to drive his father's fiery chariot across the sky for a single day. Unable to control the powerful horses, he veered wildly, scorching the earth below and creating the great deserts of Africa before Zeus was forced to strike him down with a thunderbolt. For an ancient Greek, this was not a whimsical fable, it was a causal explanation. It answered the observable question, why are some lands lush and others barren and burned? The story provided a reason, a narrative chain of events with a clear beginning, a tragic mistake, and a lasting consequence etched into the very landscape. It transformed a geographical fact into a chapter in a divine family drama, making it memorable and meaningful. Similarly, the story of the nymph Echo, who was cursed to only repeat the last word spoken to her, is a brilliant personification of a physical principle. It explains the phenomenon of sound reflection in the mountains and valleys, giving a face and a story to the mysterious, repeating voice one might hear. This was early acoustics framed as a tale of love and punishment. These myths were working models. They allowed people to predict, in a broad sense, the behavior of their world. If the sky darkens and thunder rumbles, it is because Zeus is displeased, and perhaps certain rituals can appease him. If the spring does not flow, perhaps a local nymph has been offended, and an offering is required. This system was phenomenology in action, a study of how things appear to our consciousness. Long before the term was coined, it accepted that human experience of a storm is not just wind and rain, but also fear, awe, and a search for reason. Mythopoeic thought embraced that full experience and built its explanations from it. So when we look back at these ancient stories of dragons shaping rivers or goddesses governing seasons, we are not looking at primitive guesses. We are looking at the foundational layer of human inquiry. They represent our species' first concerted effort to build a coherent, explanatory model of the universe, one that blended meticulous observation of the natural world with the deep, human need for narrative logic. It was a science of stories where every explanation came with a character, a conflict, and a resolution, making the cosmos not just understandable but intimately relatable. The very ground beneath your feet could shift from the ordinary to the sacred in a single step. Between the solid, known world and the vast, unknown realms lay the most potent spaces of all, the liminal thresholds. Beaches, caves, marshes, and the fleeting hour of dusk were not merely locations. They were active borders in the mythic map, places where the fabric of reality grew thin and the rules of nature itself seemed to change. Our ancestors observed that these ecological edges, where the forest gives way to the meadow or where the relentless sea finally kisses the stable land, were zones of incredible activity and transformation. Life congregated here in a vibrant, chaotic dance of survival. And so, the human imagination populated these literal borders with supernatural gatekeepers, spirits, and profound meaning, transforming them into mythic checkpoints. A cave mouth was not just a hole in a hill, it was a literal entrance to the underworld, a place where one could, with the right words or offerings, petition the gods of the deep or commune with ancestors. The beach was not merely a pleasant shoreline, it was the volatile frontier between the chaotic oceanic abyss and the human domain, a place where treasures from the deep might wash ashore, but also where storm gods could launch their assaults. This interpretation served a vital psychological function. It managed the deep-seated human anxiety around transition and the unknown, crossing any threshold, whether moving from childhood to adulthood, from one season to the next, or from life into whatever comes after, is inherently uncertain. By mythologizing the physical places that mirrored this experience, cultures created a framework for navigating change. These spaces demanded special protocols, turning anxiety into ritual. The marsh, a confusing, mist-shrouded land between solid earth and open water, was often seen as the home of will-o', wisps and mischievous spirits that led travelers astray. This was a narrative warning about a genuinely dangerous landscape, embedding a survival tip within a ghost story. Dusk, that magical, ambiguous hour between day and night, was universally recognized as a time when spirits could walk and the veil between worlds was at its most permeable. In countless traditions, this was the hour for lighting protective fires, saying specific prayers, or simply being indoors. By sanctifying these moments of transformation, people gave structure to the formless. The danger of the threshold was real, but it was also an opportunity. These were the places where oracles spoke, where visions were granted, and where deals with otherworldly powers could be struck. A hero did not encounter a goddess in the middle of a busy marketplace, but at a lonely spring in a forgotten grove, a liminal point between the human village and the wild forest. This practice of marking the in-between spaces taught a profound lesson about the nature of reality itself. Our ancestors understood, intuitively, that the most significant changes never happen in the center of things, but at the edges. Growth occurs at the border between what is and what could be. By weaving stories around beaches and twilight, they were not avoiding reality, but engaging with its most dynamic principle, honoring the sacred and precarious nature of every beginning, every ending, and every step into the unknown. The stories told about a river or a forest were never just entertainment, they were legally binding agreements. When a culture believed a grove was the home of a powerful deity, that belief became the most effective conservation law imaginable. The sacred groves of ancient Greece, dedicated to Artemis or Demeter, were not logging sites. They were inviolable sanctuaries where even breaking a branch could be seen as a direct offense against a goddess. In West Africa, the sacred forests of the Yoruba and other peoples served as protected reserves for biodiversity, their spiritual status ensuring they remained untouched for generations. This was landscape management through deep narrative, where the mythic realm provided the ultimate reason for restraint. A river was not merely a water source, it was the flowing body of a goddess like Ganga or a god like Hapi. To pollute it was not an economic misstep, it was sacrilege, an act that would anger the divine being who provided life itself. This created a powerful, internalized environmental ethic far stronger than any external penalty. People kept the waters clean not because a king decreed it, but because they genuinely believed the river was watching. Hunting practices were similarly governed by this mythic logic. An animal seen as the messenger of a god or as the physical form of an ancestor spirit was not simply game. Strict taboos would surround its hunting, often limiting it to specific seasons, rituals, or social classes. The white buffalo held sacred by many plains indigenous nations, or the cows revered in Hindu tradition, are profound examples. These were not arbitrary rules, they were sophisticated population controls embedded within spiritual narrative. By declaring a species sacred, a culture effectively created a protected class, preventing overhunting and ensuring ecological balance. This entire system formed a vast body of traditional ecological knowledge, a detailed understanding of local ecosystems passed down not in textbooks, but in stories, songs, and rituals. The knowledge of which plants bloomed when, which animal behaviors signaled seasonal change, and how to harvest without depleting, was all wrapped in the language of myth. The ritual became the method of transmission. A ceremony performed at the spring equinox was also a reminder of the optimal time to plant certain seeds. A dance honoring the spirit of the salmon was a communal reaffirmation to take only what was needed and to ensure the fish could complete their spawning runs. In this way, the mythic interpretation did something modern policy often struggles with. It provided the compelling why behind the practical how. Sustainability was not a burdensome regulation. It was a sacred duty, a necessary act of reciprocity with a world that was fully alive and aware. The community's relationship with its life support systems, its water, soil, forests, and animals was governed by a framework of reverence. This was a partnership, not a possession. The land was not real estate, it was a relative. The forest was not timber, it was a temple. This ancient perspective challenges our modern divide between the spiritual and the ecological, suggesting that perhaps the most enduring way to protect a place is not just to value what it provides, but to truly believe it has a story worth preserving. But a world governed by sacred stories inevitably shapes the community living within it. This profound connection between the mythic and the social reveals one of mythology's most powerful and enduring functions, the justification of social order through cosmic principles. The very structure of the natural world, as interpreted through myth, provided a ready-made blueprint for human society. If the sky god ruled unchallenged over the heavens and the lion was king of the beasts, then it seemed only natural, even divinely ordained, for a single, powerful figure to rule over humanity. This was not mere political propaganda, though it certainly served that purpose. It was a logical extension of the Mythopoeic worldview, where human society was seen as a direct reflection of the cosmic hierarchy. In ancient Egypt, this concept was absolute. The pharaoh was not just a political leader, he was the living embodiment of Horus, the sky god, and the direct son of Ra, the sun god. His authority did not come from popular consent or military might alone. It flowed from the very engine of the universe. When the pharaoh performed rituals in the temple, he was not merely honoring the gods, he was performing essential maintenance on reality itself, ensuring the sun would rise, the Nile would flood, and cosmic order, known as Maat, would prevail over chaos. His rule on earth was a mirror and an extension of divine rule in the heavens. Similarly, in China, the emperor governed with the mandate of heaven, a concept that directly linked political legitimacy to natural and cosmic harmony. The emperor was the son of heaven, responsible for maintaining balance between the human world and the celestial realm. If he ruled justly and effectively, nature would respond with good harvests and mild seasons, a sign of heaven's approval. However, if his rule became corrupt or ineffective, the mandate could be withdrawn, signaled by natural disasters like floods, droughts, or earthquakes. This framework made the emperor's power immense, but also deeply conditional and tied to the observable rhythms of the natural world. His authority was not arbitrary, it was part of a reciprocal relationship with the cosmos. This mirroring extended beyond the figure of the ruler to the very fabric of society. The natural world, as observed by ancient peoples, was full of clear hierarchies and roles. Tall trees towered over low grasses, eagles soared above ground-dwelling creatures, and predator species maintained balance over prey populations. These were not seen as random occurrences, but as evidence of a fundamental, organizing principle in nature itself. Myth provided the narrative that explained this principle, and human societies then modeled themselves upon it. The idea of a rigid social structure with a king or priest at the top, warriors below, and farmers or laborers at the foundation felt inevitable because it appeared to copy the stable, layered order of the cosmos, the heavens above, the earth in the middle, and the underworld below. This alignment served a crucial cultural purpose. It provided profound stability. In a world of very real dangers and uncertainties, the belief that social hierarchy was rooted in natural and divine law offered a powerful sense of rightness and permanence. It transformed human-made laws and customs from arbitrary rules into extensions of cosmic truth. Challenging the king was not just treason, it was an act of cosmic imbalance, akin to rebelling against the sun god himself. This mythic justification helped societies cohere, endure, and mobilize around common goals, from building monumental architecture to defending territories, all under the banner of fulfilling a divine, natural order. It rooted the sometimes harsh realities of human power structures in the perceived inevitability of the world itself, making the social landscape feel as fixed and purposeful as the rising sun or the flowing river. Yet even the most rigid social orders could not contain the human imagination forever. The ancient mythic realms never truly vanished, they simply changed costumes. They evolved, migrating from sacred groves and stormy seas into the sprawling landscapes of our modern fantasies, proving that the way our ancestors interpreted nature remains the very grammar of our stories. Consider the deep, ancient forests of Tolkien's Middle-earth. Mirkwood, with its dark, sentient trees and paths that twist and turn on themselves, is not a random setting. It is a direct literary descendant of the Celtic Enchanted Forest, a realm alive with ancient, watchful consciousness and hidden peril. The towering, mystical peaks of the Misty Mountains or the lonely, volcanic power of Mount Doom are not just dramatic backdrops, they are the sacred peak and the Chthonic Forge, reimagined for a modern myth. These are not mere inspirations, they are continuations. The same archetypal logic applies to the Wizarding World's Forbidden Forest, a place lurking just beyond the safe, ordered grounds of Hogwarts, teeming with centaurs, spiders, and other beings that operate on rules older than wizard law. It is the liminal threshold and the animate wild packaged for a new generation. This translation extends beyond fantasy into the farthest reaches of science fiction. Think of the iconic desert planet like Arrakis from Dune. It is not merely a world with little water. It is the mythic desert and wasteland realm made entire, a planet-sized stage for spiritual trial, survival, and the confrontation with absolute power. The water world, the jungle planet, the ice planet, these are not just imaginative settings. Each one represents a single, amplified mythic environmental principle, allowing storytellers to explore the human condition under the extreme pressure of a single, dominant natural force. Our insatiable fascination with these narratives, from blockbuster films to epic video games, reveals something profound. It shows how deeply these primal interpretations of nature are wired into the human psyche. They form a foundational language, a set of deep codes that tell us a dark forest means mystery and transformation, a high mountain means trial and revelation, and a restless ocean means chaos and the unknown. We do not need these concepts explained when we encounter them in a story. We feel their meaning instantly. They serve as the subconscious blueprint, the foundational grammar for all subsequent storytelling about adventure, conflict, and our place in a world much larger than ourselves. When a hero enters a cave, we understand they are crossing a threshold. When a spaceship flies into a nebula, we sense it is entering a realm of mystery and potential rebirth. These ancient environmental archetypes are the bones upon which we continue to hang the flesh of our newest myths, proving that our need to find character, story, and meaning in the landscape is a thread that stretches unbroken from the first campfire tale to the latest cinematic universe. This ancient grammar of nature now speaks to our most urgent modern crisis. As we confront the profound challenges of climate change and ecological loss, a quiet but powerful resurgence is unfolding, a return to the very worldviews that first taught humanity how to see. The animistic perspective, which understood every forest and river as a conscious neighbor, is no longer a relic of the past. It is being re-examined as a vital philosophy for our future. This is not about abandoning science, but about complementing it with a deeper story, one that can reshape our relationship with the living world from one of extraction to one of kinship. The modern concept of deep ecology, for instance, argues that all living things have intrinsic value beyond their use to humans, a principle that would have felt perfectly familiar to a shaman tending a sacred grove or a sailor making an offering to the sea. We see echoes of this ancient logic in powerful new legal frameworks. In recent years, courts in New Zealand, India, and Ecuador have granted legal personhood to rivers and ecosystems, recognizing the Wanganui River or the Ganges as living entities with rights to exist and flourish. This is a stunning, direct translation of an ancient mythic interpretation into 21st century jurisprudence. It moves beyond managing a resource and toward representing a relative in a court of law. Similarly, the Gaia hypothesis proposed by scientist James Lovelock presents Earth not as a passive rock, but as a complex, self-regulating system that maintains conditions for life. While a scientific theory, its popular expression as Mother Earth powerfully resonates with those primal stories of a living, breathing world. Re-engaging with these myths does not mean literally believing in river nymphs or mountain gods, but it does mean seriously considering the wisdom embedded in those stories, the wisdom of reciprocity, respect, and profound interconnection. Our ancestors' narratives were manuals for sustainable living within a conscious cosmos. They taught that taking requires giving, that harm to the land is a spiritual offense, and that human well-being is inseparable from the health of the entire system. In an age of disconnection, these stories offer a forgotten language of belonging. They remind us that sustainability is not just a technical problem of carbon levels and renewable energy, though those are critically important. It is also a narrative problem. We have been telling ourselves a story where nature is a separate, inert warehouse of materials for our use. The ancient myths suggest a different story, one where we are participants in a vast, animate community. Listening to those old stories might help us write the next chapter, not with fear and scarcity, but with a renewed sense of reverence and place, forging a future where our relationship with the planet is not that of a consumer to a store, but of a child to a mother, or a citizen to their common home. The world our ancestors described was one of constant conversation, but the language of that conversation changed forever with the rise of the scientific worldview. This was not a simple update, it was a fundamental shift in the very grammar we use to understand reality. Where myth presented a personal, participatory universe filled with conscious agents, science seeks objective, impersonal laws. It is the difference between asking why the storm rages and asking how it forms. The ancient mind looked at a lightning strike and saw the spear of an angered god, a complete package of physical event and moral cause. The scientific mind looks at the same bolt and sees the fascinating discharge of electrical potential between clouds and the ground, a phenomenon governed by equations of physics and atmospheric chemistry. Both are profound ways of knowing, but they answer fundamentally different kinds of questions. The mythic interpretation provided a why steeped in story, morality, and emotional resonance. It told you the storm might be a punishment for human wrongdoing or a battle between deities, embedding the event within a web of relational meaning. Science, in its pure form, offers a magnificent how. It gives us the mechanics, the predictable patterns, the underlying principles that allow us to forecast the weather, to harness electricity, and to build shelters that can withstand the wind. This shift granted humanity unprecedented predictive power and technological control. We no longer need to appease a river goddess to ensure clean water. We can build filtration plants. We do not have to perform a rain dance in desperation. We can irrigate fields from deep aquifers. The gains in security, health, and material comfort are immeasurable. Yet many philosophers and ecologists point to a profound trade-off in this transition. In demystifying the world, in removing the nymphs from the springs and the gods from the mountains, we may have also evacuated a sense of sacred connection and inherent meaning from the natural order. The forest becomes a collection of biomass and carbon sinks, the river a hydrological system, the animal a complex biological machine. This perspective is not wrong, it is powerfully useful, but it is also experientially thin. It can lead to what the sociologist Max Weber called the disenchantment of the world, where nature is seen as a passive resource, a collection of objects for our use, rather than a community of subjects with which we are in relationship. The ancient interpretations provided a framework where the world was not just knowable, it was kin. It was alive with purpose, and humanity had a role to play within that purpose, whether as stewards, petitioners, or partners. Understanding this contrast is not about declaring one worldview superior to the other. It is about recognizing what each offers and what each might lack. The scientific lens gives us mastery, but the mythic lens gave us meaning. One shows us the clockwork, the other made us feel like we belonged inside the ticking. In our current age, perhaps the most pressing question is not which view to choose, but how we might weave the threads of both into a new story, one that uses our formidable knowledge of how the world works to rebuild a sacred sense of why it matters. That rainbow is a perfect symbol of our modern paradox. We understand its physics with stunning precision, yet its magic often feels explained away. For the Norse, it was Bifrost, the shimmering, trembling bridge connecting the realm of the gods to the world of humanity, a pathway walked by deities. For the Greeks, it was the goddess Iris in motion, her multicolored robe trailing across the sky as she delivered messages from Olympus. In those interpretations, a meteorological event was not just observed, it was felt. It carried emotional weight and narrative consequence. A storm's end and the appearance of that arch of color was a sign of restored communication, a promise that the divine was still engaged with the mortal sphere. Our ancestors lived in a world that spoke to them in a language of awe and moral implication. Every thunderclap was a voice, every drought a judgment, every fertile valley a blessing. This created what we might call an emotional cosmology, a landscape where nature was not a backdrop, but an active participant in the human drama of joy, fear, guilt, and hope. The gain from moving beyond that worldview is undeniable. We have traded superstition for sanitation, sacrificed stories for satellites. We no longer lie awake fearing that a failed harvest is a sign of our collective moral failure, appeased only by a ritual we do not fully understand. The relief from that kind of existential anxiety is profound. Science has given us agency, predictability, and a shared, testable reality that can bridge cultures. But in that exchange, something subtle has shifted in our perception. We have gained a map of the territory, but we may have lost the sense that the territory is alive. Knowledge can, ironically, create a kind of distance. When we reduce a forest to its board feet of lumber and its carbon sequestration capacity, we quantify it masterfully, but we cease to hear its story. We can predict a storm's landfall down to the hour, yet that very prediction can strip the event of its primal awe, turning a symphony of elemental power into a data stream to be managed. The ancient myths did not just explain, they enchanted. They wrapped the cold, hard facts of survival in stories that made the universe feel personal, intentional, and resonant with meaning. This is not a call to discard the telescope for the oracle. It is an invitation to wonder if we can carry both. Can we hold the scientific fact of light refraction in one hand, and in the other, cultivate a renewed capacity for that raw, humbling wonder? The answer may lie in remembering that science explains the mechanisms, but it does not dictate the meaning. The physics of a sunset does not invalidate its beauty. The biology of a loved one's smile does not lessen its joy. Similarly, knowing how a rainbow forms does not have to erase our ability to see it as a bridge, not to gods, but to a deeper part of our own humanity, to our innate need for connection and awe. The ancient stories show us that humans are meaning-making creatures. We do not thrive on data alone, we thrive on narrative. Perhaps the next chapter of our relationship with nature is not about choosing between the lab and the legend, but about learning to read the findings of the lab as the newest verses in an ongoing, epic poem about a world that is still, in ways we are just rediscovering, wondrously alive. The rainbow's physics are clear, but its story is yours to tell. This ancient impulse to find meaning in the landscape is not locked in the past. It is a practice waiting to be revived right where you stand. We can call this the art of re-enchanting your local landscape, and it begins with a simple, profound shift in attention. Look out your window or step outside your door. That creek winding through the park, that distinctive rock outcrop on your weekend hike, that ancient oak in the neighborhood, these are not just scenery. They are the starting points of a story you have perhaps never been told. The first step is one of humble listening, of seeking out the deep history already written upon the land. What are the original indigenous names for the rivers and mountains near you? Those names are rarely arbitrary. They are often precise descriptions, historical records, or stories compressed into a single word. Learning that a local river was once called the Singing Water or the Valley of the Eagle immediately layers it with a forgotten narrative. Investigate its geological history too. Was that rounded hill shaped by a glacier 10,000 years ago? Was this plain once the bed of an ancient sea? This knowledge does not dispel mystery, it deepens it, adding a monumental scale of time to your perception. Now apply the mythic lens not as superstition, but as a conscious exercise in relationship. That gnarled, sprawling tree at the edge of town, what if you saw it as a guardian of that space? Does its shape tell a story of resilience, of weathering countless storms? That small, inexplicable hillock in an otherwise flat field, could it have been a meeting mound, a burial site, or a place where generations gathered? You are not inventing falsehoods, you are practicing a form of narrative empathy, asking what role this feature might have played in the lives of those who came before you and the ecology it supports now. This practice is not about believing in literal nymphs in the stream, but about acknowledging the stream as an entity with its own character, its own rhythm of floods and low waters, its own community of life it sustains. It is about shifting from seeing the world as a generic environment, a passive backdrop, to experiencing it as a specific place, a unique character in the story of your life and your community. This intentional re-enchantment has a powerful, practical consequence. It is far easier to ignore the pollution of a generic river than it is to neglect a waterway you know as Old Man River, whose history you have learned and whose seasonal moods you have observed. When a local woodland is not just a parcel of land but the home of the great heron rookery or the place where the first spring wildflowers bloom, its value becomes personal, its protection a matter of caring for a neighbor. You begin to act from a sense of kinship rather than abstract obligation. This is exactly what our ancestors did through their myths. They encoded care into story. By giving your local landscape a narrative, you weave yourself into its fabric. You become not just a resident but a participant, a storyteller for that patch of earth. The next time you walk the same path, you will not just see trees and soil. You will walk through a layered tale of geology, ecology, and human memory. You will feel, perhaps for the first time, what it means to truly be at home in a world that is alive with meaning, waiting only for your attention to bring its stories back to light. The ancient stories of great floods and cleansing fires now echo with a chilling new relevance. We are not just observing climate change, we are living inside a new myth in the making, one where humanity has unwittingly taken on the role of both creator and destroyer. The planet's rising fever, the intensifying storms, the great forests burning, these are not random events. They are chapters in a story we are all writing together, a global drama where we are both the protagonists and the cause of the conflict. This is the narrative of the Anthropocene, the proposed geological age where human activity is the dominant force shaping the Earth's systems. And just as our ancestors crafted stories to explain the volcanoes and seasons they witnessed, we now face the urgent task of crafting new myths to explain, and more importantly, to navigate the world we have altered. The old tales provide a crucial blueprint. They show us that myths are not escapes from reality, but tools for grappling with it. The Babylonian story of a world born from the body of the chaotic sea goddess Tiamat feels eerily prescient in an age of rising oceans. The Norse image of the world tree Yggdrasil, under constant stress from forces gnawing at its roots, mirrors our own planet's strained systems. These are not predictions but profound metaphors for resilience and interdependence. What we need now are new stories that personify this age, narratives that can hold the complexity of our situation. We require myths that do not cast humanity as a lone hero conquering nature, nor as a simple villain, but as a collective character that has stumbled into God-like power without the accompanying wisdom. Imagine a story where the atmosphere itself is a character, a great, wounded sky being whose fevered breath is the result of a million unconscious choices. Or a narrative where the ocean's rising acidity is framed as its slow, silent sorrow. This personification is not childish, it is a psychological tool. It externalizes a vast, abstract crisis into a relationship we can understand, fostering empathy for the living systems that sustain us. The goal is to forge a new ecological ethic, one learned from the old models. The ancient practice of seeing a forest as a sacred grove taught restraint through reverence. Our new stories must teach restoration through responsibility. They must frame our task not as mastering a broken world, but as participating in its healing, as humble apprentices learning to mend the very web we have frayed. These will be myths of cooperation, not conquest, stories where technology serves reciprocity, and where the happy ending is not dominion but a hard one, lasting balance. The next great myth is being written in the choices we make every day, and it asks of us the most ancient of questions. What story do we want to tell about our place in this living world? The final lesson from these ancient realms is breathtaking in its simplicity. They saw no line between the stone and the sacred, between the flowing water and the flowing story. This was a holistic vision, a complete fusion of the physical and the meaningful that created a world of profound coherence. A mountain was not a geological formation that happened to have a god living on it. The mountain was the god, its mass and majesty the divine made tangible. A river was not a body of water named after a deity. The river was the goddess, her currents, her thoughts, her floods, her moods. In this worldview, everything was dual-natured, existing simultaneously in the realm of matter and the realm of myth. This unity provided something our modern perspective often struggles to find: a deep, resonant sense of purpose in the very fabric of existence. The world was not random or indifferent. It was intentional, communicative, and full of signs to be read. The rustle of leaves in a sacred grove was not just wind, it was the whisper of a spirit. The crash of a wave was not just physics, it was the voice of the deep. This interpretation made the universe a place of constant dialogue, demanding not passive observation, but active, respectful engagement. It embedded humanity firmly within the narrative, not as its author or its audience, but as a vital character with a role to play. You were not a tourist passing through a scenic landscape. You were a participant in an epic drama where your actions, from how you hunted to how you honored the dead, had consequences that rippled through the entire living system. This synthesis of keen observation and powerful narrative did more than explain volcanoes or seasons. It provided a profound psychological comfort. In a precarious world, it offered identity, placing you in a lineage of heroes, ancestors, and gods. It provided a guide for living, a manual for balance encoded in ritual and story. To take a life, whether animal or plant, required an offering. To drink from a spring required a prayer of thanks. This was the operational code of a sustainable society, one that understood survival as a form of sacred reciprocity. The unified message of earth, sky, and story is this: meaning is not something we impose on the world from the outside. It is a quality we discover through relationship, by listening to the old stories the land itself has to tell. That unified vision offers us a final, timeless gift. It reminds us that every explanation we have ever crafted for the world, from the first story told around a fire to the latest data from a satellite, springs from the same deep well within us. Our ancestors looked up at the wheeling stars and did not see random points of light. They saw a celestial clockwork, a grand and predictable mechanism that gave order to time itself. They looked into the dark soil and saw not mere dirt, but the chthonic realm, a transformative underworld where decay was the necessary prelude to rebirth. These were not separate observations, but chapters in a single, magnificent story, humanity's first grand theory of everything. It was a poetic, powerful, and profoundly participatory science. They did not just study the world, they conversed with it, believing their rituals and stories were part of the dialogue that kept the cosmos turning. This approach transformed raw, paralyzing fear into a narrative one could follow. It turned meticulous observation of animal migrations and plant cycles into a living cosmology, a map of meaning. Most beautifully, it transformed the anonymous landscape into sacred scripture, where every mountain was a verse and every river a chapter in an epic about existence itself. As we have journeyed through these realms together, it becomes clear these interpretations were anything but primitive. They were sophisticated, resilient systems of knowledge, ethics, and survival. They encoded generations of ecological wisdom into memorable stories, enforced sustainable practices through spiritual reverence, and provided a stable identity for people living in a precarious and magnificent world. Our tools for understanding have undeniably changed. We have traded the oracle for the observatory, the myth for the mathematical model. These tools grant us a kind of power and precision our ancestors could scarcely dream of. Yet the core human drive that set them storytelling beneath those ancient stars remains utterly unchanged. We still seek to find our place, to weave the disparate events of our lives into a coherent narrative, to understand the why behind the how. Let these ancient mirrors, then, serve as a gentle reminder. They ask us to look at the world not solely with analysis, but to preserve a space for awe. They invite us to quiet the noise of modern life, if only for a moment, and listen for the older stories still whispered by the wind through the pines and murmured by the water over stone. And most importantly, they call us to remember that we are not outside observers of a dead machine. We are participants, characters with agency and responsibility in the Earth's great, unfolding, and still vital myth. The story continues, and we are all writing it together.